Cassian's boots sank into the damp, moss-covered ground of Sionis 5 as the jungle canopy loomed overhead, casting everything in hues of deep green and blue. His equipment beeped occasionally, recording data on the alien flora for his mission. As a xenobiologist on the first human expedition to this uncharted world, his job was to catalog the ecosystem and report back to the fleet orbiting high above. The plant life was astonishingly diverse, with towering bioluminescent trees and creeping vines that pulsed with an almost heartbeat-like rhythm. The air was thick with humidity, and every now and then Cassian caught glimpses of strange, small creatures darting between the foliage. But it wasn't the strange plants or fauna that made his heart race. It was the sense that he wasn't alone. He had heard rustling in the brush more than once. His hands tightened on the straps of his pack as he scanned the horizon. Nothing visible. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, and he mentally chastised himself for being paranoid. Still, there was something about Sionis 5 that set him on edge, as if the planet itself was watching him. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed through the jungle, and before he could react, something large and fast barreled into him. Cassian was knocked to the ground, landing hard on his back, the wind knocked out of him. His vision blurred momentarily as a weight pinned him down. When his eyes refocused, he found himself staring into a pair of glowing silver eyes. His heart froze in his chest. The creature, or rather, the woman, straddling him, was unlike anything he'd ever seen. She had skin the color of deep violet, marked by intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to shift with the light. Her features were sharp yet beautiful, high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and lips that were currently pulled into a thin, assessing line. Long black hair fell in thick waves down her back, and her body was encased in sleek armor made of what appeared to be alien hide. In her hand, she held a spear tipped with an iridescent metal, its point hovering dangerously close to Cassian's throat. "Stay still, human," she hissed, her voice low and commanding. The translator in his ear crackled, struggling to keep up with the alien dialect. He caught fragmented phrases: invader, outsider, and most frequently, savage. Cassian held up his hands in surrender, his breathing uneven. I'm not here to hurt you," he managed to say, trying to keep his voice calm. The woman's grip tightened on the spear, her eyes narrowing. She seemed to understand his words, but there was no sign of trust in her gaze. "Then why are you here?" she demanded, her voice cold. "Why do you trespass on sacred Varesh land?" "I'm a scientist," Cassian explained, his voice trembling. "I study plants, biology. I'm not here to invade or harm anyone, just research." The warrior's expression didn't soften, but her spear's point moved an inch farther from his throat. She regarded him for a moment longer, then, with a swift motion, pulled him up from the ground, her strength catching him off guard. Cassian staggered to his feet, wiping the mud from his clothes. She stood tall in front of him, at least a foot taller than his 6 feet, her spear still held tightly in her hand but no longer poised to strike. "I've never seen your kind before," she said slowly, her silver eyes studying him with an intensity that made Cassian's skin prickle. "Your arrival has caused concern among my people." Cassian's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. The Varesh were the native species of Sionis 5 then, a warrior culture by the looks of it, and if she was any indication, they were far more advanced, at least physically, than humans. The fleet hadn't encountered any signs of intelligent life before landing, and now Cassian was realizing just how wrong their preliminary scans had been. "My name is Cassian," he said cautiously, hoping to ease the tension. "I come from Earth, a planet in a different star system. We didn't mean to intrude on your land." The woman crossed her arms, still watching him with suspicion. "I am Zira of the Varesh. My people protect this land from outsiders, especially those who claim ignorance. You were careless to wander here alone." Cassian nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm starting to realize that." Zira's eyes flicked over him once more, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they stood in silence, the jungle around them humming with the sounds of distant alien creatures. Despite the fear that still pulsed through his veins, Cassian couldn't help but be awestruck by her. She wasn't just intimidating. She was magnificent in a way that felt both alien and eerily familiar. "I should take you to my leaders," Zira said at last, her tone softening slightly. "But I do not believe they will be as forgiving as I." Cassian's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Zira turned, her spear still in hand as she began to walk deeper into the jungle. "My people see you as a threat, a savage race that does not belong here. If I present you to them, they may decide that it is better to eliminate the danger than risk letting it grow." Cassian's heart sank. "So, what do you suggest?" Zira stopped and glanced over her shoulder, her eyes gleaming. "I suggest you prove them wrong." Cassian hesitated. "And how do I do that?" Zira smirked, a hint of challenge in her gaze. "You survive." Without another word, she turned and strode off into the jungle. Cassian, still processing the weight of her words, hurried after her, knowing that his life had just become far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. As the two of them disappeared into the shadows of the alien wilderness, Cassian realized he had only scratched the surface of this world, and of the mysterious, dangerous woman who had just saved his life. The twin suns of Sionis 5 hovered low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the alien landscape as Cassian sat on a ledge overlooking the sprawling jungle. The air was cool now, a stark contrast to the humid heat of the day, and a faint breeze rustled the leaves of the bioluminescent trees. It had been weeks since his fateful encounter with Zira, and everything had changed. She stood beside him now, her posture relaxed but always alert, scanning the horizon as if expecting trouble. Cassian had come to understand that this wasn't paranoia. It was instinct, honed over years of training as one of the Varesh's elite warriors. Her people lived in constant vigilance, always ready for battle, always prepared to defend their territory. But here, with him, she allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. For weeks, they had explored the planet together, a fragile partnership that had blossomed into something far deeper. They'd fought side by side against the strange, predatory creatures of Sionis 5, shared stories of their vastly different worlds, and over time the tension between them had dissolved. Now there was something else, a connection, undeniable and electric. Cassian glanced at Zira out of the corner of his eye, his heart beating faster just at the sight of her. The alien warrior had captured his attention from the moment they'd met, but now it was more than fascination. He couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her, the way his heart raced whenever she was near. And despite the barriers between their species, despite the unknowns, he was falling for her. Zira's voice broke through his thoughts, low and quiet. "You've grown stronger, human," she said, not turning to look at him. Cassian smiled, leaning back on his hands. "You've taught me well. I'd probably be dead 10 times over by now if it weren't for you." Zira gave a small, approving nod. "Perhaps. But you have adapted quickly. It's rare for someone from another world to survive as long as you have here." He chuckled. "Is that a compliment?" She finally glanced at him, her silver eyes gleaming in the fading light. "It is the truth." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the ambient hum of the jungle. Cassian let out a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He had been dreading this conversation, but it was time. "There's something I need to ask you, Zira," he said quietly. She turned fully toward him now, sensing the shift in his tone. "What is it?" Cassian hesitated, the words stuck in his throat. How was he supposed to say this? His heart pounded in his chest as he gathered his courage. "You've been distant lately," he began carefully. "And I've noticed something's changed." Zira's expression darkened slightly, and for the first time since they met, there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She crossed her arms, the muscles in her shoulders tightening. "There is something I must tell you," she admitted, her voice lower than usual, as if she were weighing each word carefully. Cassian frowned, unsure of where this was going. "What is it?" Zira looked out over the jungle, her silver eyes reflecting the fading light of the suns. After a long pause, she placed her hand gently over her midsection, a gesture so subtle that Cassian almost missed it. "I am with child," she said, her voice steady but soft. Cassian froze, his mind unable to process the words at first. He blinked, staring at her in disbelief. "What?" His voice was barely a whisper. Zira turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "It is true. The bond between our species is rare, almost impossible. But Varesh biology is adaptive. And I am pregnant, Cassian." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and for a moment Cassian felt like the ground had fallen away beneath him. Pregnant. Zira was pregnant. With his child. He swallowed hard, trying to get his thoughts in order. But how is that even possible? I mean, we're from different planets, different species. I didn't think that was possible. Zira finished for him, her tone calm. Nor did I, but it seems our biology has proven us both wrong. Cassian ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. A child. Not just any child, but a hybrid of two species from completely different worlds. He felt a mixture of emotions, fear, joy, confusion, all swirling inside him like a storm. What would the child look like? What kind of life would they have? Would they even survive, given the genetic differences between humans and the Varesh? "I don't know what to say," Cassian admitted, his voice shaky. Zira stepped closer to him, her towering frame casting a shadow over him. For the first time since he'd known her, there was vulnerability in her eyes. "You do not have to say anything, Cassian, but you must understand the gravity of this situation." Cassian's heart pounded as he looked up at her, realizing that this was more than just an unexpected pregnancy. This was about Zira's people, her culture, and the dangerous position they now found themselves in. The Varesh were a proud, warrior race. Their customs were ancient and unyielding. A relationship between a Varesh and an outsider, especially a human, would be seen as a betrayal of everything her people stood for. "What will your people say?" Cassian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zira's gaze hardened, her face becoming a mask of resolve. "They will not approve. The Varesh have strict laws about interspecies relationships, and I have defied them by being with you. When they find out, it could mean exile for me, or worse." Cassian felt a cold dread settle in his chest. "Then why tell me now? Why take the risk?" Zira looked down at him, her eyes softening just for a moment. "Because I trust you, and because we must face this together. Whatever comes next, we cannot run from it." Cassian took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had known from the beginning that being with Zira was dangerous, but he hadn't expected this. Still, as terrifying as the situation was, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. He loved her, more than he had ever thought possible, and now they were going to have a child born of two worlds, a symbol of something greater than both of them. "What do we do now?" Cassian asked, his voice filled with determination. Zira reached out and took his hand, her grip strong but gentle. "We go to my people. We tell them the truth." Cassian's eyes widened. "Are you sure that's wise? What if they—" "I do not fear them," Zira interrupted, her voice firm. "But we must be prepared. My father is a high commander in the Varesh military, and my mother sits on the Council of Elders. They will not take this news lightly." Cassian felt a chill run down his spine. He had met dangerous creatures and braved hostile environments, but nothing felt as daunting as the prospect of meeting Zira's parents. "What will they do to me?" he asked quietly. Zira's jaw tightened. "They will not harm you. Not if I stand by your side. But I cannot promise they will accept you or our child." Cassian nodded slowly, his mind still racing. "Then we'll face them together." Zira's eyes softened once more, and she squeezed his hand gently. "We will. But remember, Cassian, the Varesh do not trust outsiders easily. You will have to prove yourself to them. Prove that you are not the savage they believe you to be." Cassian swallowed hard, realizing the full weight of what lay ahead. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for his family, for Zira and for their unborn child, and nothing, not even an alien race's disapproval, would stand in his way. As the twin suns of Sionis 5 finally dipped below the horizon, casting the world into a deep purple twilight, Cassian and Zira stood together on the ledge, their hands entwined. They were two beings from different worlds, but in that moment, they were bound by something far stronger than fear. They were bound by love, and soon, by the life growing inside her. Cassian stood at the edge of the Varesh capital, his heart pounding in his chest as he stared up at the towering citadels that stretched into the lavender sky. The city was unlike anything he had ever seen, a vast expanse of sleek, crystalline structures that shimmered in the fading light of Xionis V's twin suns. Everything here had an ethereal beauty, from the elegantly carved bridges that spanned the flowing rivers of light to the spiraling towers that seemed to defy gravity. But for all its beauty, Cassian couldn't shake the growing sense of dread gnawing at his insides. This was Zira's home, and this was where everything could go terribly wrong. They had arrived just a few hours ago, traveling on one of the Varesh's sleek silver transports from the wilderness where they had spent the last few weeks. Cassian had barely spoken a word since they'd entered the city, his mind too busy racing with the possible outcomes of the night ahead. Zira had been equally quiet, though her silence was less from fear and more from the unspoken tension between them. They both knew what was at stake. Cassian glanced at Zira as they made their way through the city's gates. She looked as calm and collected as ever, her posture straight, her face unreadable. She wore traditional Varesh armor now, the plates of sleek, shimmering material glinting in the twilight. Her long black hair was braided tightly down her back, giving her the appearance of a true warrior, strong, composed, and fearless. But Cassian could feel the tension rolling off her in waves. She was nervous, even if she would never admit it. She had every reason to be. They were about to face her family, the Varesh elite, and deliver news that could shatter the foundations of her entire life. As they approached the grand estate of Zira's family, Cassian couldn't help but feel like a trespasser. The Varesh had allowed him into their capital only because of Zira's status, but the sideways glances he received from the Varesh soldiers told him everything he needed to know about how they viewed him. He was an outsider. Worse, he was a human, a savage in their eyes, and Zira had brought him home. Zira glanced over at him, her silver eyes softening just slightly as she saw the concern etched on his face. "Do not show them fear," she whispered, her voice low but firm. "They will sense it. Stand tall. You belong here." Cassian nodded, though the knot in his stomach tightened with every step they took closer to her family's home. The estate was enormous, a sprawling palace made of the same shimmering crystal that dominated the capital, its walls lined with intricate carvings that told the story of the Varesh's long and proud history. Warriors, rulers, and heroes adorned the exterior, their figures immortalized in the stone. Cassian couldn't help but feel small in comparison to the legacy that surrounded him. At the entrance to the estate, 2 Varesh guards stood watch, their eyes narrowing as they spotted him. Zira stepped forward, her voice clear and authoritative. "I am Zira, daughter of Valash and Oria. I have returned to my family with a guest." The guards exchanged a glance before stepping aside. As the heavy door swung open, revealing the grand hall beyond, Cassian swallowed hard. There was no turning back now. Inside, the hall was magnificent, with tall pillars that stretched up to a ceiling adorned with murals depicting Varesh victories and legends. A long table sat in the center, illuminated by soft, glowing orbs that floated above like miniature stars. And at the head of the table, seated in regal silence, were Zira's parents. High Commander Valash, her father, sat stiffly, his gaze as sharp as a blade. He was a formidable figure, his violet skin darkened with age, his silver hair tied back in a tight knot. His armor, though ceremonial, spoke of years of battle-hardened experience. He was every bit the warrior Zira had described, a man who valued strength, discipline, and loyalty above all else. Beside him sat Oria, Zira's mother, the matron elder of the Varesh Council. She was elegant, her violet skin unblemished, her silver eyes glimmering with wisdom. Her robes were adorned with intricate patterns of Varesh history, and her expression was cool, controlled, as she regarded Cassian with an unreadable gaze. As Zira and Cassian approached the table, Valash's eyes locked onto his daughter, then shifted to Cassian with a thinly veiled disdain. "So," Valash said, his voice a low growl, "this is the human you bring into our home." Cassian straightened his back, trying to appear calm, though every instinct screamed at him to run. He could feel the weight of Valash's judgment bearing down on him like a storm. Zira nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, Father. This is Cassian from the planet Earth. He is my partner, and I am carrying his child." The words hung in the air like a dagger poised to strike. Valash's eyes darkened, and Oria's lips pressed into a thin line. The tension in the room was palpable, so thick that Cassian could hardly breathe. "A child?" Valash's voice was cold, his gaze cutting into Cassian like a blade. "You defy the laws of our people, Zira. You betray your bloodline by consorting with this outsider." Zira stood tall, her jaw set. "I follow my heart, Father. I love Cassian, and we are to have a child. That is the truth, whether you accept it or not." Oria finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Love is not enough to defy our ways, Zira. You know the consequences of such actions. A union between a Varish and an outsider has never been accepted, and it will not be now." Cassian's heart pounded as he stood next to Zira, trying to remain composed under the weight of their disapproval. But the anger in Valash's eyes was unmistakable, and the cold distance in Oria's voice told him that this was no ordinary family dispute. This was a matter of tradition, of pride, of an ancient culture that saw him as a threat. Valash rose from his seat, his towering frame casting a shadow over them. "You bring shame upon our house, Zira. To father a child with a human, one of a species that knows nothing of honor or discipline, is a disgrace." Cassian clenched his fists at his sides, biting back the urge to defend himself. He knew this wasn't the time for an outburst, but the insult stung deeply. He wasn't some savage. He had come here with respect, with a desire to understand and prove himself worthy. Zira stepped forward, her voice filled with defiance. "I have fought for this family, bled for this people. I have served with honor my entire life. Do not question my loyalty because I have chosen love. Our child will be strong, of two worlds, and I will not let you diminish what we have." Oria's eyes softened for a moment, as if she saw the truth in Zira's words, but Valash's anger remained unwavering. "You speak as if this is a choice you are allowed to make," Valash spat. "You know the council will never accept this union. If you continue down this path, you will lose everything, your title, your honor, your place among the Varish." Cassian finally spoke, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "I may be human, but I'm not the enemy here. I love Zira, and I'll stand by her no matter what. Our child deserves a chance to be part of both our worlds." Valash sneered, his eyes narrowing. "You are nothing, human. You don't understand our ways, our traditions. You think love will protect you? You are a fool." Before Cassian could respond, Oria raised a hand, her voice cutting through the tension. "Enough." The room fell silent as Oria rose to her feet, her gaze shifting between Zira and Cassian. "The council will decide the fate of this union. We will not act without their judgment." Valash gritted his teeth but did not argue. Oria's authority was absolute within the family, and even he could not defy her word. Oria looked at Cassian, her expression unreadable. "Until then, the human will remain under observation. You are both dismissed." Zira bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect, though her face remained defiant. She turned and gestured for Cassian to follow her out of the hall. As they walked in silence through the towering crystal corridors, Cassian could feel the weight of what had just happened settle heavily on his shoulders. Zira's parents had made it clear this was no small matter. They were on the brink of a decision that could change everything, for better or for worse. When they finally reached the edge of the estate, Zira stopped and turned to face him, her expression softening. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Cassian shook his head. "You don't have to apologize. This was always going to be hard." Zira reached out and took his hand, her grip strong but tender. "They will come around. I will make sure of it." Cassian nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. "And if they don't?" Zira's eyes blazed with determination. "Then we fight for what is ours." Cassian squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with a fierce love for the woman standing beside him. The Varesh Council chamber loomed before Cassian and Zira, a vast hall carved from the same crystalline substance that dominated the architecture of the city. The walls shimmered with iridescent hues of purple and blue, casting an otherworldly glow over the space. High above them, the ceiling was a mosaic of stars, as if the very universe had been etched into the stone. The Varish were a people who believed in the power of legacy, in the strength of their ancestors, and the path of the stars that guided their fate. Now, Cassian and Zira stood at the center of that ancient tradition, their future hanging in the balance. Zira had been unusually quiet on the walk to the chamber, her usual confidence tempered by the gravity of the situation. The Council of Elders, 7 of the most powerful figures in Varesh society, would be the ones to decide their fate. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about their child, their future, and the possibility of uniting 2 worlds that had never seen eye to eye. Cassian glanced at Zira as they stood before the massive doors, which were guarded by 2 elite Varish warriors. Zira's hand rested on the hilt of her ceremonial blade, her fingers twitching slightly, a small but telling sign of her nerves. "I'm with you," Cassian whispered, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. Zira turned to him, her silver eyes softening. "I know," she replied, "and whatever happens in there, we face it together." The doors creaked open with a low groan revealing the circular chamber within. 7 towering thrones lined the perimeter, each one occupied by a member of the Varesh Council. They were regal figures, their violet skin and silver eyes marking them as the leaders of their people, their robes adorned with the symbols of Varesh history. At the center, directly across from where Zira and Cassian stood, sat Oria, Zira's mother. Her presence was commanding, her expression unreadable as her gaze fixed on her daughter. As the doors closed behind them with a heavy thud, the chamber grew silent, save for the faint hum of energy that seemed to pulse through the very walls. Cassian swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The lead elder, an ancient Varish with deep silver markings etched into his skin, spoke first, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Zira of the Varish, you stand before the council accused of breaking our sacred laws, of defying the traditions that have guided our people for millennia. You have taken an outsider as your mate, and now you carry his child. Do you deny these accusations?" Zira stood tall, her voice unwavering. "I do not deny them. I love Cassian of Earth, and I carry our child. I stand here not to beg for your approval, but to declare that we are a family, and we deserve to exist." Cassian felt a surge of pride at Zira's defiance, but the tension in the room was palpable. The elders exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of surprise, disapproval, and curiosity. Oria remained silent, her eyes never leaving Zira. The lead elder's gaze shifted to Cassian, his eyes narrowing. "And you, human, you stand here in our most sacred chamber before the Council of Elders. What do you seek in the arms of one of our own?" Cassian took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He had known this question was coming. He had prepared himself, but the intensity of the elder's gaze made his heart race. He squared his shoulders, meeting the elder's eyes. "I didn't come here looking for anything. I didn't expect to fall in love with Zira, but I did. She showed me strength, courage, and honor like I've never seen. She's a warrior, and she's taught me more about your people than I could have ever learned from studying this planet." He paused, gathering his thoughts, then continued. "I'm not asking to change your ways. I respect your culture, your traditions. But I also believe that love and family are universal. Zira and I, our child, we represent something new, something that could bridge the gap between our worlds. I'm not here as an invader. I'm here because I love her, and I want to build a future with her." The elder leaned back in his throne, his expression inscrutable. There was a murmur among the council members, their silver eyes gleaming as they whispered amongst themselves. Cassian's heart pounded in his chest as he awaited their judgment. Oria's voice cut through the murmurs, clear and commanding. "Cassian of Earth speaks of love, but love is fleeting. It is not the foundation upon which the Varish have built their strength." She turned her gaze to Zira, her voice softening slightly. "My daughter, you have always been strong, always followed the path of the warrior. But this path you have chosen with him is dangerous. It threatens the balance of our people. Zira didn't flinch. Our child will not be a threat to the Varesh. They will be a bridge. They will carry the strength of both our worlds. I will raise them to honor our traditions, but they will also know the strength of humanity. The universe is changing, Mother. We cannot cling to the past forever. There was a heavy silence in the chamber as Oria's eyes flickered with something, doubt perhaps, or maybe understanding. But before she could respond, another elder, a stern woman with deep violet skin, spoke. There is more at stake here than just a child, Zira. Your union with this human represents a breach of our laws. If we allow this, it could lead to chaos. Others may follow in your footsteps, and the purity of the Varesh will be compromised. Cassian felt a surge of frustration at the elder's words. He opened his mouth to respond, but Zira spoke first, her voice sharp. The purity of the Varesh is not in danger. Our strength does not lie in isolation, but in adaptation. Our ancestors knew this when they first settled on Sionis 5. They adapted to this world, made it their home. I am doing the same, but in a new way. We cannot close ourselves off to the universe, or we will fall behind. The elder scowled, but did not respond. Cassian felt a spark of hope. Zira's words were cutting through the resistance, but they weren't out of danger yet. Oria leaned forward, her eyes on Zira once more. You speak with passion, daughter, but passion is not enough to sway the council. You are asking us to accept something unprecedented, something that could alter the course of our people's future. Zira met her mother's gaze, her voice calm but resolute. I am asking you to trust me, to trust that I am doing what is best for the Varesh. Our people are strong, but we cannot stay strong by shutting out the rest of the galaxy. Cassian and I, our child, we are the future. We represent the next step in our evolution. Oria held her gaze for a long moment, and Cassian could see the conflict in her eyes. Finally, she turned to the rest of the council. We must decide. The elders huddled together, their voices low as they deliberated. Cassian stood beside Zira, his hand brushing against hers. She didn't move, but he felt the warmth of her presence beside him, a silent reminder that no matter what happened, they were in this together. The lead elder finally rose, his voice echoing through the chamber. We have reached our decision. Cassian's heart pounded in his chest as the elder spoke. Zira of the Varesh, your actions have defied our laws, and you have brought an outsider into our midst. But you have also shown strength, resilience, and a belief in the future. The council recognizes that the universe is changing, and so too must the Varesh. Cassian felt his breath catch in his throat as the elder continued. Therefore, we will not punish you for your union with the human, but this path you have chosen will not be without its trials. You must prove that your bond is worthy, that your child will not weaken our people, but strengthen them. We will allow your union to stand for now. Cassian exhaled, relief flooding his body. They had won. Not a full victory, perhaps, but enough. They had a chance. Zira nodded, her face calm, but her eyes filled with quiet triumph. Thank you, Elder. We will not disappoint you. The elder inclined his head, but there was no warmth in his gaze. The future will judge that. As Cassian and Zira turned to leave the chamber, Oria's voice stopped them. Zira. Zira paused, turning to face her mother. Oria's eyes softened just for a moment. You have always been my strongest warrior. I hope you know what you are doing. Zira's expression softened in return. I do, Mother, and I will make you proud. With that, they left the chamber, the weight of the decision still heavy on their shoulders, but their path forward clear. As they stepped out into the twilight of Sionis 5, the twin suns sinking low on the horizon, Cassian reached for Zira's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. We did it, he said, his voice filled with wonder. Zira looked at him, her silver eyes gleaming in the fading light. We did, but this is only the beginning. Cassian nodded, his heart full. Then we face the future together. And as they walked forward into the unknown, hand in hand, they knew that whatever trials awaited them, their love and their family would be strong enough to face them all.